Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Seeds of Creativity. I am Benjamin Krudwig, and before we get started, I want to say another thank you to everybody who takes time out of their day to watch these episodes. I really enjoy making them, and it's something that I feel very passionately about, so thank you so much. If you are returning to the channel, thank you again for coming back and watching. And if you are new to the channel, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that you can get notifications every time I upload a new episode. In this episode, I wanted to talk about something a subject that plagues me even to this day, and it plagues me more than I would like to admit, and that would be imposter syndrome. While this isn't a medically recognized illness, it's not a mental illness, it's not an ailment, it's not at all recognized by any major medical field, it is a real phenomenon. So it is something that has been classified, it's just not a medical term. I believe it was first described in the late 60s, which totally makes sense to me. It's kind of the rise of the entrepreneur, in my opinion. But I'm pretty sure these feelings have existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years, once we evolved a prefrontal cortex. So, what is imposter syndrome? It is exactly what it sounds like. It is the feeling of being an imposter or a fraud in various settings. I find that it's usually in settings in which it's your vocation or your skill, something that you're good at, in the industry that you are in. So say like you're an author and you go to a writing conference, it might be that you would say something like, oh, I don't belong here, I'm not a real author. That's kind of that sort of thing. So, I mean, like, how many times have you said something to that effect, like words to that effect? I don't belong here. I am not as good as these other people. I don't have the same credentials as the other people. I didn't get formally trained in this, like, etc., etc., etc. In my experience, this very real phenomenon is a form of fear or anxiety that stems from a need to be validated. For me, this almost always happens after a big jump in my career or a milestone, when a new opportunity arises. That's when it really rears its ugly head for me. What I find fascinating is that these specific events are technically acts of validation from the external world. However, it's the delay between our minds and our circumstances that causes this fracture. Not to mention, the validation that we are craving is either from ourselves or it's from someone long ago in our past or currently that we're trying to please or trying to impress. This issue, imposter syndrome, is particularly difficult for individuals who already have a predisposition to anxiety or depression, self-esteem. It hits those folks harder, potentially, but it can hit anybody at any time. This is something that I think plagues most people at any given moment in their life. This, imposter syndrome thing happened to me pretty hard when I showed my first collection last year. And it was a moment of validation that I was chosen to do the show. And I was really excited initially, and I felt very honored initially, but that wore off, and then I was terrified. I felt like I wasn't qualified to do a show because I didn't have formal fashion training. I didn't have any education that was for fashion. So I felt, well, I don't belong up here with these other people who do this for a living. Well, unfortunately, that can happen. And unfortunately, it's a very insidious problem, and it's very, very dangerous to the creative spirit. So it can freeze us in place. It can bring about a lot of negative self-talk. And at the end of the day, it can actually keep us from creating altogether. We might just hang up our hats and say, I'm done. We say things like, I shouldn't even bother, or like, what's the point? It's those things that makes imposter syndrome so dangerous as a creative individual. So what did it take for me to snap out of it during my show? First, I had to claim my space, mentally and physically, and I needed to recite the mantras. I deserve to be here. I worked hard to get here, and I belong here. Those three mantras really helped me just feel better, and just even like saying them now makes me feel better. Thinking back at that time, I still think about those feelings that I had right up until my show. I also had to give myself permission to take up that space and to take pride in the work that I was doing. I had to give myself permission to validate myself. It was a hard task, but fully worth it. I ended up having to do this over and over again, right up until like minutes before the show. Doing this, reciting these mantras is actually very, very important. Especially if you feel like you don't belong or you feel like a fraud, this energy does exude out of you and people can pick up on that. So they will in turn place you in that box and you almost create that which you most fear. Honestly, I occasionally get imposter syndrome when I do these videos. I am not an expert in psychology or, in this realm, but I have lived some life and I am learning things all the time. And I post these topics in particular because these are things that I struggle with or have struggled with in the past, and I have found my way out of them, or I am doing the trial and error of figuring out how to get out of them. And honestly, like if I can use my experience and anecdotes to help somebody else, then that is a job well done. Like that's what I'm passionate about, and that's why I'm trying to help you by sharing intimate moments of myself. Do you struggle with imposter syndrome? And if so, how do you overcome it? Let me know in the comments down below. And kind of in the future and right now, this episode is a culmination of previous episode topics. So permission, identity, mission statements. And as we keep going through this series, I will be referencing past videos because those are building blocks in a well-rounded creative life. And next week we are going to be in episode 8. So we are almost at 10 episodes, which I cannot believe. But we will be talking about fear and specifically how it ties into our creative practices. I have some great resources that I'm going to share with you next week. And if you have any questions that you would like me to answer, go ahead and put those down in the comments below as well. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye.